Welcome to the Western Bell podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled The Art of Japa. The talk was given by Michael Menager and Clarke on June 8, 2024 via Zoom. Michael is a musician, singer, author, and modern-day troubadour, whose third album is Line in the Water. Mick is a writer, practitioner of Vedic astrology, and mental health social worker. Both live in New South Wales, Australia, and are students of Lee Lozowick, a Western spiritual teacher who died in 2010. In this talk, Michael and Mick speak about their experience of the practice of Japa, or Ramnam, repeating the name of Ram as an expression of the divine or of any name of God, which can be done anywhere at any time and reorient us to relationship with the sacred. Consideration of the practice begins with the reading of a statement made by Yogi Ramsarat Kumar, a South Indian saint who died in 2001, about a quote by Krishna from the Bhagavad Gita. In discussing the topic, Michael and Mick reference comments made by different teachers and practitioners, including Swami Ramdas, Yogi Ramsarat Kumar's master, Neem Karoli Baba, Sri Aurobindo, Sanatan Das Baul, Parvati Baul, and others. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Mick Clarke speaks first, and then Michael Menager.
It's customary in Australia to acknowledge country before any public talk. So the Blue Mountains is within the World Heritage Area of the Gudungara and the Darug traditional owners, who have a continuous and deep relationship with this landscape. And Michael is from Tantawangalo in the Bega Valley of southern New South Wales, the country of the Diringunj and the Yuin people. So we honour their elders past, present, and the sacred lands we share with them. So this consideration arose from a quote from Yogi Ramsarat Kumar, a saint from South India, my guru's guru. The Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, has this intriguing verse. Among sacrifices, I am the silent repetition. So Yogi Ramsarat Kumar said, Yajna Nam Japa Yajno Shmi. He said, among sacrifices, I am the silent repetition, says Lord Krishna in the Gita. Chanting of Lord Rama's name is a great sacrifice, and participating in this Mahayagna is equal to receiving initiation from my master, Swami Ramdas himself. My father will bless all those who participate in this Mahayagna, and all welfare will accrue to them. So we wondered, what might this mean? How is sound empowered? And what is the sacrifice? How can sound shape our spiritual life? How can empowered words passed on by a saint protect us and transform our lives? So I looked at a couple of different versions of this verse in the Gita. I went first to Janeshwar's Gita, the personal favourite of my teacher, Lee Lozowick, the beautiful lyrical commentary on the Gita. And this verse reads, among all the forms of worship in this world, I am repetition of God's name. Having abandoned action, I give rise to action and other forms of religious activities. So, disclaimer here that we have no expert knowledge. This is more a curiosity to share this exploration. So we bring a beginner's mind to discuss mantra and our experience with sacred sound. As practitioners, we've come to this practice through the teachings of Lee and the Western Baul tradition. The Bauls have a long tradition of expressing their devotional practices through poetry, song, dance, and music. I've had some positive and expansive experiences with chanting and mantra, including music. As a weird child, I would secretly love to recite the Marian Rosary and often felt a lucid joy chanting to Mary, the Divine Mother. I felt the blissful chanting called Kirtan in the Hindu tradition. And once listening to the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt, I had this wild experience of like leaving my body, listening to his sublime music. In Kerala, India, I visited an ashram called Ananda Ashram, which translates as the ashram of joy, where the only practice is chanting Ramnam, which sounds like Om Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Mantra is often associated with rituals like homas, such as Agnihotra, a Vedic fire practice at sunrise. A beautiful invocation of offerings and chant is offered. And of course, in Tiruvannamalai in Tamil Nadu, India, Yogi Ramsarat's name is chanted continuously all day, every day in his temple. Just a few weeks ago, I walked into a Zen temple nearby the Nachi waterfall in Japan on the final day of the epic Kumano-Kodo pilgrimage trail across the mountains of Ki in central Japan. Upon entering this old wooden temple, I heard the sonorous heartbeat of the Heart Sutra being chanted in Japanese and felt this same sacred world embrace me. Now I practice with mantra as much as I can manage, and more often it's silent and internal, so you wouldn't notice. Intentionally bringing my attention to mantra, whether riding my motorbike or walking or driving or even at work, especially at work. Other times I practice longer chants like the Gayatri or the Hanuman Chalisa. The subject of mantra is like a terma teaching, which is a Tibetan Buddhist term to describe a dharmic depth charge. So the deeper you go into the teaching, the more it opens out and reveals. The greater the light is revealed. The word mantra is Sanskrit from the root man, from manas, which relates to mind, to think, to measure, and tra, an act or instrument that permits something to be done, causes to be conveyed. Another derivation is from crossing over, transports. There's no generally accepted definition of mantra, as it's said to be likely older than language itself, as revealed sounds received by the rishis, the poet mystics of the Vedas. The tantric philosopher Abhinavagupta in the 10th century said that mantras are, and I love this word, mananatra narupa, thought and salvation. That is a form of thought that brings freedom. Mantras are associated as the sound forms of deities in that they liberate their user, whose mind becomes one with the deity. Japa is defined as speaking mantra, that's from jap, to utter in a low voice or to repeat internally. My favorite definition of mantra is crossing over the mind. But what does this mean? If I go beyond the mind, what might I find? And is there anyone there to find it? How can mantra, a sacred sound, take me beyond the incessant machinery of mind? We see mantra present in all the great wisdom traditions across language, cultures, and tradition, across time and space. Prayer, song, and sound have been used for millenniums to connect with the divine mystery. From the Christian tradition, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." The Islamic tradition, the Jewish tradition, Jain, in Buddhism, Taoism, all these traditions direct sound into the heart of longing. Looking into mantra took me down a rabbit hole of Vedic metaphysics and into recent modern astrophysics that reports on the discovery of a humming universe, the sound of ringing eternity. Before stars or planets or even atoms or rays of light, the universe reverberated with something surprising. Sound. The primordial hum moved at about half the speed of light through a superheated plasma of baryons, photons, and dark matter. In the first few 100,000 years after our universe was born, this primordial hum danced through a plasma of superheated particles. And scientists are now able to listen in with the hope of gaining new insights about the mysterious force known as dark energy. So there arose a tug of war between ancient and powerful fundamental forces generating sound waves in this electrically charged soup of particles. So these sounds were around 47 octaves lower than the bottom note on a piano, with enormous wavelengths of around 450,000 light years. And then just a few 100,000 years into its existence, the plasma disappeared, just like a morning fog. The universe fell suddenly and profoundly silent. And out of this universal matrix of sound and space and light, India's ancient poet sages, known as the rishis, are said to have cognized these primordial sounds. And even seeing these sacred sounds encoded in the sunlight, their degree of discernment and capacity to receive was highly refined. In Sanskrit, the word shabda refers to this sound as the primordial eternal vibration of the divine manifesting behind all silence and sound. Mantra, says Yogi's guru Swami Paparam Das, tunes the entire human being with the eternal music of the divine. Parvati Baul says of the Baul way of praise, this singing and dancing transforms space and time and what is in the mind. We turn our mind and body and speech in one direction towards praise, so we are able to become one beyond duality. Singing and not singing become one because you are so much one with your sound, you cannot get away from it. There's sound in that silence. Yogi Ram Saratkumar had a direct relationship to Rama, a solar deity in the Hindu tradition, and encouraged Ramnam or Nama, chanting the name of God, as a powerful practice. Intuitively, I understand this connection as we are all an expression of divine light, however far from brightness we find ourselves these days. This practice offers us a harmonic resonance to the divine mystery. We touch the heartbeat of the universe through the devotional practice of sound. So I've discovered 3 things about Japa practice. 1, peace. Mantra turns on the parasympathetic nervous system, P for peace, and the relaxation response. So mantra is calming and it turns off the default mode network. So that's the part of the brain that's obsessed with me thoughts. And research supports this fact that mantras reduce brain activity seen in self-centered thinking. 2, surrender. So I surrender my self-reference by moving my attention to the name of the divine. Among sacrifices, I am the silent repetition. So Krishna is referring to himself as the sacred sound. The mantra is condensed divine energy. In this exchange, I become the sacrifice also, the Mahayajna, the great sacrifice. I offer it all. I chant for the people I love. I chant for those suffering. I chant to find my way through the rain. Devotion is cultivated. Fleet Moore described the dynamics of devotion thus: make offerings, receive blessings. So offering sacred sound or mantra is empowered by my faith, intention, and devotion. The world becomes magical with a devotional practice as we enter into relationship with the sacred. Blessings arrive unexpectedly. In mantra yoga, faith or devotion is said to be the most important condition for success. Mantra practice removes distinctions, judgment, and separation. I connect sound to the heart, which connects me to the divine mystery. So then breaking it down like this, I realize that is exactly what's helpful for me in a crisis, in a global crisis, in a darkening world. Here's a simple practice that can help restore the light by seeding it with sacred sound. In the present age, the chanting of the name of God is even more emphasized. The Ramayana says, in the age of Kali, the chanting and remembrance of the names of God is the most powerful means of crossing the ocean of material existence. So what of Ramnam? Who is Ram? Historically, Rama is the heroic protagonist from the Indian epic, the Ramayana. This was written as a 24,000 verse poem by Valmiki between the 7th and the 4th centuries BCE. He's much beloved in Hindu culture, as is his wife Sita, and as is Hanuman, the monkey god enlisted to find Sita after she was kidnapped by the demon Ravana. The qualities of Ram are devotion and courage. Swami Papa Ram Das describes Ram. Ram is the great truth, impersonal, dwelling in the hearts of all beings and creatures in the universe. He's the all-pervading, immanent and all transcendent reality. He has assumed the form of all beings and things. He is the all-inclusive and all-transcendent supreme Godhead. In taking Ramnam, you think you are taking the name of a deity living in some far-off heaven, but you're really repeating the name of your own immortal self. You do not know that you are Ram, so you must ceaselessly remember him until you are awakened to the consciousness that you are Ram yourself. And all these different names of God we see across the great wisdom traditions, I see as referring to the one, this one turning and burning diamond of the divine mystery. Isn't it possible we are all the humming notes, the dancing song of creation? And much like the Vedic poets in Australia, the Indigenous peoples refer to these sounds as trails and elements of songs that create the sacred landscape. These songlines follow the literal pathways of the dreamtime ancestors, mapping the landscape, revealing the visible and invisible worlds. Yogi says, whatever name you choose, whatever form you choose, it doesn't matter. Remember the Lord with any name. The divine name is like an umbrella in the heavy rainfall. We take an umbrella and go on doing our work. We go through the rain that is falling there. Still, we do our work. You catch hold of the divine name and keep on doing your work in the world. The beggar says of you, don't forget the divine name. Say this beggar's name just once and I will be with you. And I think it's worth emphasizing again that any of the names of the divine are equally effective depending on the Ishta Devata of the devotee, which means the deity that you are naturally attracted to or drawn to. Swami Papa Ram Das says, chanting is not the mere uttering of the name. An effort has to be made to dwell on his attributes, such as absolute love, to ensure it doesn't become mechanical. One must know to chant is to remember him constantly, and remembrance must develop into an intoxication with God. The intoxication must turn into God consciousness, so much so that one is always aware of the divine presence. With regular and proper chanting, gradually the infinite power inherent in the name helps to arrest the wandering mind, turns the mind inward, leads to detachment, enables expression from me to we, leads to the source, and finally causes the act of chanting itself to be effaced. With faith and perseverance in the course of time, chanting will result in concentration, and gradually the restlessness and impurities of the mind will disappear. So we know from Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar that he left his life as a family man and an English school teacher in northern India, and eventually landed with Swami Papa Ram Das in South India, who prescribed Ramnam as his primary spiritual practice. His only practice he taught was nama, praise, to repeat the name of God. In the early 1990s, I was able to meet the beggar saint on his front veranda in Sanadi Street beside the ancient temple in Tiruvannamalai. I recall this gentle, jovial man, so beyond anyone I've known, dressed in rags with long dreadlocks and a cigarette always burning. He felt like the soft, radiant heart of the universe, love incarnate, receiving a long, steady stream of devotees chanting his name, offering him prasad, gifts of fruit, flowers and coconuts. And he raised his hands and said, "My Father blesses you." This is a comment from my teacher Lee about mantra. And he said that clearly ancient mantras are empowered because they've come through revelation. When a mantra is newly empowered, it takes on a more active aspect of blessing over and against a passive aspect of blessing. when you use it for whatever reason, it has a kind of additional charge to it, which is the immediate living presence of the teacher, the teaching and the lineage that has activated the mantra. Yogi never told me when or how the revelation came to use his name as a mantra. I don't know if he told anyone or if that's a conversation he had had. It has particular relevance for us because it has been activated in our company, in our time, in our place, over and against Om Namah Shivaya or some other mantra. We're lucky to have had Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar's name because it has a meaning to us that gives it a certain rocket fuel. In Dr. Svoboda's book, Agora 2, he describes speech as possessing prana, vital energy when attention is placed into it. Speech is an independent faculty, he says, that operates through the mind. Kundalini is the influence of the power of self-expression, which means that speech is the verbal expression of Kundalini. The stronger the focus, the greater amount of prana, the more effective it will be because speech is a Shakti. Japa is a practice to realign yourself with the path where you want your prana to flow. Keep moving forward with a mantra and a deity. In the Indian tradition, Vach is a Vedic goddess, a bit like the personified form of speech, a female deity. She possessed the hearts and minds of the poets or rishis. She gives the expression of sound and speech. She's known as the mother of the Vedas, the consort of Prajapati, in the Vedic tradition known as the creator. And it's interesting to see that later she became known as Saraswati, the goddess of creative intelligence, speech, wisdom, art, and music. We recognize her now dressed in white, seated upon a lotus, holding with her 4 arms a veena, a mala, a book, and a water pot. Krishna Das, a well-known devotee of Neem Karoli Baba, Maharaji, explains, Maharaji always used to say that repeating Ramnam, everything is brought to fullness and to completion. The heart is made full, your life is made full, the karmas are completed. It's a ripening process. Everything is brought to fullness and completion. Over to you, Michael.
Oh, well, first of all, I want to suggest, because we thought beforehand about questions, I reckon now is the time, if anybody's got anything they'd like to add or like to comment on, now would, I think, be a good time before I start.
I was thinking about Parvati Bowell, and one thing that she said was that in this day and age, people have such limited attention spans. They can't really do long practices. People don't do long, involved practices anymore. And she said that the best practice for our times is to chant the name of the divine, to chant mantra, because it only takes a second. It's flexible. You don't have to sit down in front of a puja and light candles and all of that. You can just do it anywhere. You can do it on your way walking out the door. So she said that to her, she felt like that was the best practice for this day and age.
Aurobindo said the bird flying over the ocean in search of land might use a piece of driftwood to rest on until it finds land. And a mantra is like this place to rest the mind. I like that analogy, that it offers a form of sanctuary. It's something really easy you can hang on to and offers us rest and connection too, I think.
I'm interested in the way in which mantra can become something that resonates with attention and intention, or how it can easily degenerate into something that's mechanical.
Yeah, what I would say about that from my own practice is that I feel the benefit in the moment I'm saying the name, because it's drawing me back from some sort of self-reference or panic or whatever it happens to be. It's hitting both things at the same time, so to speak.
Certainly, there's different forms of practice. There's Kirtan, there's Likita Japa, which is actually writing the name, mantra. in terms of how to practice, I like this process where there's a gathering of attention into the mantra and I'm listening, but I'm also noticing when I'm getting distracted, and it's much like a form of mindfulness. That the whole notion of beginning again a million times is really useful, and just bringing attention back to the mantra. And like the superpower is our attention. And I think like a muscle, it can get trained in the direction of devotion, gathering our attention, noticing when the mind wanders, letting go of the distraction and starting again, It doesn't need to be mechanical. I think there's a softness and a quality about it that doesn't feel mechanical to me, just by how we're using our attention, directing it and offering it as a practice of devotion.
Do you think that it's important to combine mantra with practice of awareness of our own separative dynamics or tendencies by self-observation, by observing ourselves? Or do you think that repetition of the divine name is all that's needed?
Well, for me, I like to keep it fairly simple, and I'm happy just returning to the name, just trying to bring my attention back to that. Certainly, awareness is embedded in that practice, and there's a degree of observation going on. But the beauty of this is that it's just such a simple thing. It's such a simple practice. Yeah, there's an awareness of the name just going round and round, and I'm aware when my attention's pulled elsewhere, and I'm not getting into any kind of struggle with that, bringing it back, creating a groove or a space where I can rest my attention. And so rather than it being a distracting thing, it becomes a focusing practice and quietening. It really does quieten the mind. It can lead you into quite a peaceful space. There's a lot of noise out there in the world, and I find it a really quietening practice amongst all the noise out there.
Oh, sure. Undoubtedly a quieting practice, and when done with intention, for me anyway, to recognize the reality of the divine every moment or in a particular moment, really pulls me out of my mental chatter. But I'm also wondering if it's possible to use it in a way that covers over other aspects of ourselves that we really need to look at and work with. Probably depends on how it's done, but it just occurred to me as something to bring up.
In my own case, I see a very strong link between mantra practice or japa and self-observation. Those two things happen at once for me, because the sacrifice in that verse from the Bhagavad Gita is the sacrifice of self-reference. It's a sacrifice of me. So whatever the problem or the difficulty I happen to be in, which makes me recall the name, somehow I'm not so wrapped up in it. I'm not so involved in it anymore. And that happens to me instantaneously. Remembering that name also makes me remember myself and the fact that this is something I'm walking through and I have help. Like that.
I like to ask, particularly Mick, if you're still doing the same job that you have been doing, do you notice an effect of your inner practice on those that you are working with, particularly those who seem to be troubled?
So I work with distressed people, and I think many therapists have this experience of not knowing what to do or say quite often with distressed people. And when I come to that place, I'm chanting quietly to myself. And I think it does create a chamber with somebody. It creates a space of relaxation and letting go. And always something arises next. I can trust what happens or what comes up without giving specific examples. It's something I really rely on in my work, that I can have japa in the background and with someone who's extremely distressed, and that's helping me feel held. And I know that the person I'm with is experiencing that in some way as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it does create a chamber, a field of influence.
I have a very different kind of job, but I am meeting people constantly in what I'm doing. And there's a lot of distress around.
Yeah.
How to maintain equanimity within myself.
Yeah.
This really helps really helps me to remember who I am. So there's a kind of resonance. Then there are those times when that resonance isn't there. And I think that this is what you're speaking to, that it can really help to bring people into a place where there's less stress.
And I'd also add, you don't have to worry about trying to change the space or fix the distress or anything other than just being with the person and being with yourself. So that's how I generally approach it. If I can be as present as possible, and if I can remember to have the name there, that it's creating some resonance chamber, some field, some space where solutions emerge and we can get to the next breath. It gives me something to hold on to if I'm with somebody who's going under. I think a lot of people in our culture these days have a feeling that they're going under, they're being held underwater, and it's a great service to be able to be with somebody and not want to fix that, but just to be with them and offer them your attention and heartfulness. Magical things happen out of that. I've come to trust that. It's a really useful way of working.
For me, mantra is also a prayer for the world. And in these times that we are living through, I can speak for myself and say that there are periods that I feel very helpless and devastated. But I find that if I can remember mantra in those moments, something comes alive for me. And in some subtle, perhaps invisible way, it can bring some light into the world. So I wanted to mention that, and also that we speak about the effect of mantra on the mind and the heart, but I would also add how mantra lands in the body. And it could be because of the somatic work that I've been doing, but I've become a lot more aware of where does it go in my body.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to my friend Mick. I consider Mick a true scholar. I sort of have the veneer of a bit of a scholar myself, like I've done a couple of degrees, but Mick, it's about love, and it's reliable and extremely useful. So my turn to talk for a little while. I'm just going to take a minute to throw a couple of pieces of wood on the fire. It's starting to chill down. It's past midday here, and it got maybe just close to 50 this morning, but it's dropping, 50 Fahrenheit, that is. So just give me about a minute, a couple pieces of wood, and then I'll be warm enough for the duration of the talk.
Oh gosh, I thought he was speaking metaphorically.
No.
He's actually going to put some wood on the fire.
He has a wood fuel stove. It's wonderful.
Yes, because down under, it's winter there. Yeah, or getting there.
Yeah, early winter.
Okay, I think we're good to go. So I'd like to begin by talking about how I came to be in relationship with the practice of Nama Japa, repetition of the names of God. Unknowingly, my Roman Catholic upbringing prepared me for certain of the concepts that we've been discussing today. The English word used to describe some of the ritual practices of Catholicism is invocation, the act of calling upon a deity or other spiritual entity for aid, protection, inspiration, and the like. Of course, we could invoke the devil too. An invocation can consist of calling on God in prayer or as a witness. To invoke can also mean to summon by charms, i.e., to create conditions that attract the deity being summoned by creating an inviting chamber, for example, using flowers, bells, incense, chanting, wearing special vestments, ornaments, and so on. Traditionally, the preface to a sermon included an invocation, such as this verse from Psalm 19. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing unto you, O Lord. The notion being that the speaker wishes to become an instrument of the divine, a channel through which the divine can be expressed. Zen Buddhism offers the image of the meditator becoming like a hollow bamboo with no impediment to the divine, and through which the divine can then play whatever tune it wants to. In any case, the notion of a word or words uttered with intention and having an immense power to manifest, to literally bring into presence that which is called upon, is less exotic to us culturally than it might appear at first glance. Especially, well, I won't say especially, but with me and my Roman Catholic background. Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar, the South Indian saint that Mick has already referred to, takes this concept of invocation a bit further in his description of what we're actually doing when we repeat one of God's many names. The Nama and Nami, the name and the person bearing the name, are inseparable. The name of God and God are inseparable. It is as if, in Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar's view, no extended effort or great attractive force needs to be expended to summon the divine for help or inspiration, just the utterance of a name. And that entity, that force, is here, present, in the very same instant. Nama Japa will do, Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar has said. There's no need to do any other sadhana. And with these somewhat maybe surprising words in mind, I'll get back on the track of my personal relationship with the practices we've been talking about. I'll commence by saying something about a longtime friend of mine, a yogi called Kaivalya, a name that was given him by his guru. I'd met him in the late 80s down here on the far south coast of New South Wales. In those days, a number of us from around the area were getting together out in the bush at various places for extended periods of time and doing different sorts of ritual. One of the practices we engaged was Lagu Shankar Prakshulam, a yogic inner cleansing ritual that takes place over 3 or 4 days. Kaivalya facilitated this work, and over the several times that I participated, I struck up a good relationship with him. Eventually, Kaivalya came to be a semi-regular visitor to Judas and my place, an inland property with a Clearwater Creek running through it called Kurul. When Kaivalya visited, he slept in a room separated from our sleeping space by a thick adobe wall. His daily ritual, and virtually the only yogic practice he claimed to be engaging regularly at that time of his life, was to rise at the time of Brahma Muhurta, the hour of God, the 50-minute period preceding dawn, and he would light candles and incense, and then after arranging himself on a cushion with his harmonium within reach, he'd chant the Hanuman Chalisa in its entirety, accompanying himself. 40 verses in Hindi, praising Sri Hanuman, the constant and steadfast servant of Ram. But I didn't know the first thing about this prayer, the Hanuman Chalisa, when I first heard my friends sing it. I just knew, but I loved it. Feel of it, the meter of it, the space it created, the whole thing. I didn't want to miss it, not even one day, like Kaivalya was a gift in our house. I would wake in the dark with the first notes of his harmonium coming softly through that solid mud wall, if not before, and quietly come in to join him. Kaivalya died early in 2016. He and Judith and I had been out of touch for several years. And then I had a phone message from him after Judith's passing in late 2014, but I didn't follow it up. Then I had another message from a friend about Kaivalya's passing. He'd been out for his morning run at 72 years of age. He lived in an illegal shack up in the Blue Mountains east of Sydney when he wasn't traveling around and sleeping in his old blue VW transporter van with his big German Shepherd. In any case, he'd strapped weights onto his wrists and ankles, as was his habit, and with his dog trotting beside him, had taken off across the rocky terrain. He was found lying on his back in a meadow full of flowers, an instantaneous, massive heart attack, so they said. The big German Shepherd was there waiting patiently. Okay, I said to myself, after getting this message, I had made some half-hearted stabs at memorizing the Hanuman Chalisa before, it's true. But on hearing this story, I knew that I had to begin again in earnest. One thing that I remember from my one and only visit to the Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar ashram at the end of 1999 was something Lee said to us on that trip about how beings such as Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar operate in relation to this world. According to him, one of the things they do is to generate a force from within their practice that acts as a counterbalance to the other kinds of forces of madness, evil, whatever, that rage through our world. To hold these sorts of forces in check to some extent at least, sort of like putting weight on the other end of a teeter-totter. Kavalya's faithful daily chanting of the Hanuman Chalisa struck me as being resonant with this particular facet of the work of great beings, as Lee described it. Each morning, a song is set afloat upon the planetary consciousness, a song in praise of the total devotion of Hanuman, son of the wind, to his lord Ram and to Ram's consort Sita and his brother Lakshmana. A song that catalogs one deed of sacrifice and daring after the other, each performed in a spirit of absolute love by someone whose single-pointed goal is to become a perfect servant. A song which in its entirety celebrates a state of being in which the other is written in infinitely larger letters than the self. The passing of my friend Kavalya, as I saw it, opened up a vacancy that somebody needed to fill. Somebody needed to take up the commitment of putting the song of Hanuman out on the planetary airwaves on a daily basis. I suppose I could have just walked past that particular help wanted sign, but for some reason I didn't. Instead, I took on the practice of the Hanuman Chalisa as a replacement for that departed yogi friend of mine. I started out by chipping away, strophe after strophe. In the early days, I used to chant from the very beginning of the prayer to the place where my memory would go fuzzy, accompanying myself on one of my guitars. Sometimes it was country, sometimes it was blues, sometimes it was up, sometimes it was down. Sometimes it was just the lonesome cowboy sitting by his mesquite fire out on the painted prairie. But most importantly, I usually didn't miss. I got into the space most mornings and I did what I could. Hanuman, I would say to myself once I'd had a cup of tea, and then I would stride purposefully to the place of study and get to work. Perhaps the thing that I could say that would most accurately encapsulate my relationship with the practice of the Hanuman Chalisa at this stage, a half dozen years or so down the line, would be something like this. At present, having unintentionally at first named Hanuman as my Ishta Devata, my chosen deity, and repeated his name and deeds thousands of times, it's like if I can remember, I have a compass with the needle always pointing to true north. In this case, pointing away from self-reference and towards any opportunity to be of service to others. So in this sense, the Nama and the Nami, Hanuman, the name ascribed to this being who embodies the qualities of a perfect servant, and the presence of the qualities of Hanuman in real time come together, and they form a psychological roadmap that I can read and follow to my chosen destination, to be useful, perhaps even helpful to others as much as I possibly can. So this outlines a bit of personal history with the practices we've been speaking about. I'd like to end this part of my segment with an observation made from the standpoint of someone in their mid-70s with still a long way to go and applicable to virtually everything. And this is, when in doubt, keep it simple. If we're interested in a spiritual practice suited to this age of speed and confusion in which there's a predominance of cheating, lying, sloth, sleeplessness, violence, depression, lamentation, bewilderment, fear, and poverty. This is from a description of the Kali Yuga in a Vedic text. Then, if we're looking for a practice applicable to the age I've just described, then for some of us at least, it might lie here. The simplest of all yajnas is the chanting of the holy names of God. This is called Japa yajna, or the sacrifice of the devotional repetition of the divine names of God. For the practice of ritualistic yajnas, a number of rules are applicable, all of which need to be meticulously followed. However, in Japa yajna, there are no rules. It could be done anywhere and at any time. Hearing this again makes me think that I'm okay just to continue riding my horse in the direction that it's going.
I'm amazed, Michael, that you took that on as a practice. You must have just instinctually felt an impulse to do that.
Well, like I said, there was a help wanted sign out there somewhere. Well, it wasn't out there somewhere, it was there. Help wanted in this area, vacancy. So in that sense, it was actually a pretty simple decision. And I look on it later, of course, I'm immensely grateful. It led me to something I could only be grateful for, Cavallia's influence, and then for what happened to me, hearing that he was no longer able to fill the spot, so to speak.
It's so wonderful to know that halfway around the world, we're all connecting in this wonderful chain of praise.
Well, Mick had spoken a little bit about using mantra or japa practice in his work. Do you do the same, Michael? You are a musician and pour a lot.
Again, talk about self-reference. Let's say performing in front of an audience, right? I mean, you can be so concerned about so many things like, oh my God, I forgot the way this goes, or what am I going to do with my hair? Whatever. It can be so many things. And it's not about that. It never is. But, you know, it helps me sometimes in the middle of a slight panic about something or other. I'm sitting there and the name will come and instantly it's like, yeah, right. Well, this isn't about me. At very best, I'm a channel for something. That's the best. And that doesn't have anything to do with how I look, how well I play, how well I sing. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that. It has to do with that hollow bamboo aspect. Let the wind come through, let it play its tune, like that. So yeah, it does come into play. As I said, in moments of panic, this piece of driftwood in the ocean, okay, now I can reorient myself to what I'm actually doing here, which is not worrying about this stupid thing that just happened or the fact there's sweat dribbling down my face or drool coming out of the side of my mouth or anything like that. No, it's not about that.
Gosh, there's some urgency when there's panic, for sure. But it seems like when there's not panic, just sometimes randomly, the thought will come into my mind to speak the name, a name of God. To remember, it just comes for no apparent reason.
Well, the other end of that is that I try this part of the practice. When something good happens, something favorable happens, it can be any little thing, to remember the name then with the thank you or something. That's the other end of things. I've been talking a lot about the panic button. That's not a bad one, but that's a pretty good one too, because it helps you to appreciate things even more. Instantly, not only are you remembering the name and thanking the source of all or whatever put me here in this paradise, but I'm also appreciating it more. I'm seeing the colors more brilliantly, things like that.
Beginning of last year, I joined a group which practices kirtans every fortnight for about 3 hours at a stretch. And it's quite fun, and there's usually a bit of amusement amongst the whole thing. But what I've found and I'm really curious about is occasionally, absolutely out of nowhere, I'll just completely tear up. And I'm just wondering if this is a sort of a common experience.
I think as we get older, our skin gets a little thinner. Things that move us, there's not that much blocking them. The tears come. It happens to me a lot. Sometimes even when I'm performing, it happens to me. And I've learned to just accept it. It's real. It's just a little easier to come out these days. Less in the way, thinner skin.
Certainly, Kirtan, it's a devotional practice, right? And chants are offerings through the heart. I think there's a certain opening or activation that can happen. I felt this also in Kirtan. Had some wonderful experiences. Everyone's in this field of sound and music and heartfulness that can be very moving. I think all sorts of things can come up. It could be tears or bliss or sadness or grief. It can offer a space for a lot of things to move through us. I don't think that it's neglecting other parts of our work or our psyche. I think it's a practice that can transform everything, really. I think it's really quite profound in its capacity to move us and open our hearts to experience these different states. And it's wonderful to have that experience communally with a whole bunch of people. It's very lovely.
About how sometimes tears come, true for me as well. And I know that for me, it puts me in touch with my longing for the beloved, my longing for the divine in such a visceral way, in such a heart-opening way. And that's what music is anyway. I think music has a very unique, profound capacity to open the entire world, including the world of the divine, to us. It can be very, very powerful and can have a transformative effect. There's a vibration that continues to hum within us even after the chanting is over or the Kirtan is over. It just continues to circulate within us.
I was going to comment on allowing of the heart to repeat the mantra. I can mentally do the mantra, but Ramana Maharshi said, bring the head down to the heart. And from the Jesus prayer and that long tradition of the prayer of the heart, allowing the heart to beat the mantra, just by my imagination, actually, just to direct it there, has a different sense for me than the repetition in my head.
Well, it seems then that the practice of mantra can deepen. And maybe one starts out mentally repeating it, but it can become something else.
I think so.
Yeah, I think too, the teachers and these great traditions have pointed us in those directions. So I think we have some clues to follow and we can try it out, experiment for ourselves and see.
I've heard it said that some mantras are empowered. How can you tell a mantra that's empowered, and where does that come from? What does that mean?
Well, for me, I feel it means it's imbued with the blessing and the attention. Well, in our lineage, it's from Yogi Ram Kumar, as a practice which has a specific blessing force around it. I think, in the Christian tradition as well, there are many prayers around Jesus and Mary that similarly have that sense of a blessing field encoded in that practice.
What about the actual Sanskrit syllables themselves? Say in a Sanskrit word.
Yeah, well, taking it that Sanskrit is an empowered divine language and that it has a particular vibration and that these mantras have a particular influence on our lives and our hearts. Again, it's one thing to talk about it. I think it's very much something that's more evident in practicing and being in relationship with mantra to make it more embodied and less abstract. Certainly, some of us are familiar in the Baul tradition where a lot of these practices are presented through music or through song and dance, so that offers another way of embodying that prayerfulness through the body as a way to express the divine, which is really a beautiful practice.
We thought what we might do is play a song, one of my songs from my new album at the end. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the bowels and music as the practice of some sort. We could say that there's a practice aspect to music on many levels. So I wanted to talk about that, but that's not exactly veering completely off the subject matter, but a little bit. So I'd rather stick with, if there's more comment, and then at a certain point go over to the music thing. Any more comments to be made or questions to be asked or distinctions or anything like that?
Sure. What's felt right to me is that empowered mantras come about through revelation. What does that mean, revelation? I mean, it always seemed pretty mysterious to me, but something is instinctually recognized by someone who's a hollow bamboo. Someone who's an authentic master receives something about a particular mantra and then offers it to others to use. And somehow there's a transmission of their own state. They're in touch with the reality of the mantra. And so it's not just a group of words together. There's more underlying the whole communication. That's felt right to me anyway.
It is experiential. It's going to be personal. Your experience with it, the way in which you take it is going to be a personal thing, an experiential thing. And for me to tell you what the benefits might be to you, I think would be overstating. I think there would be, but I'm not sure exactly if they'd be coming like mine. We probably all get different blessings too. It's not always the same blessing, I bet.
Is there importance when it comes to the pronunciation of a mantra? I'll give an example here. One particular kirtan starts Om, and the way we pronounce it is Om Triambakam Yajamahe. And I've watched a few versions on YouTube sung by Indians, and they go Om Triambakam. There's no tri, it's tri.
I do understand that it is important to approach Sanskrit with the correct pronunciation as far as possible. So it would be beneficial to have someone who's able to demonstrate the correct pronunciation. So I understand that it's more effective with the correct pronunciation.
Well, for me, I always really struggled with the pronunciations in the Guru Gita. One of those lines in the Guru Gita was to beg forgiveness if you've mispronounced anything. But I tend to think that the heart really matters, your context, where you're coming from. I mean, I sure hope so anyway, that is the most relevant factor, and not the exact pronunciation, because otherwise, who knows what realm it might end up in.
There's been some really cool versions of songs in English with foreign accents, man. Very charming.
In other words, don't panic.
Always good advice.
This has been such a great opportunity to go a bit more deeply into practice. So it's great to have company.
Martin Preptel, he's a beautiful writer, shaman, musician. He's written a number of books, but I was listening to a talk of his, and he was saying that for human beings, it's all about making beauty, creating beauty. And that when we create beauty, we're not doing it so that we can keep it ourselves. We're doing it so that others can live. And I was thinking about that in relationship to mantra, and how there's something about saying mantra, whether you say it with your heart or you speak it, you sing it, that brings beauty into the world. I think that can be very powerful.
I'll say a few things about the bowels. The bowels make their living by something called madhukar, which is begging. Traditionally, and maybe still, I've never actually seen the bowels perform on crowded buses, on trains, roadside tea stalls, fairs, anywhere. And so the bowels live and work in a kind of a dual capacity. They shelter in their spiritual work, their sadhana, and they wander the realistic field to make a living. And in their music, they delve deeply into psychic features which orient human thought and mentality. They are, in quotes, successful artists in drawing human nature. Bowel sadhana is nothing but a lifelong, untiring zeal for unveiling the mystery of man. What makes us tick? How do we think? I have to say, I've listened to a lot of Sanatan Das Baul, who's my favorite Baul musician, and I only get into the spirit of the music. I never actually read a translation, but there's a psychological aspect to the work. They're trying to figure out what makes us tick and what is our mystery as people and what are we supposed to be doing and where is our energy supposed to be being directed. So I feel a comradeship with the bowels, not only in what I try to do in my own songwriting, but also the places where I play. Yesterday was an outdoor courtyard at a barbecue place up north. Two more things. Leonard Cohen said not long before he died, he said, people talk about the coming catastrophe. He said, I got news for you. The catastrophe has already happened. It's already here. And the only question we should be asking ourselves is, what is the proper conduct during a catastrophe? And then Bob Dylan, in that great song, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. What's that girl's name who sang it for him at the Nobel thing? I can't remember her name now offhand, but anyway, wonderful punk singer. She made a mistake and started over again. It was a big deal, big report in the news. No trouble with Bob and no trouble with her either, but everybody else, oh, you stopped and you started. Anyway, I'm going to know my song well before I start singing. That's what he said. So the song you're going to hear is based on a true story.
Michael has some rare ability to create a mood and write lyrics that bring one in touch with oneself and with the path. So this song, Line in the Water.
You throw a line in the water. You throw a line in the water. You throw a line in the water. Wait and see what you pull out. Well, some fellows were fishing down in Galilee, casting their nets out into the sea, when a stranger walked up and said, come follow me. I'm gonna make you fishers of men. So they dropped their lines and sinkers right there and then, followed in his footprints right to the end. And it was true when he told them that he would rise again, and that the gates of hell would shake and tumble down. You throw a line in the water. You throw a line in the water. You throw a line in the water. Wait and see what you pull out. It was a bad neighborhood. It was central LA. I landed there looking for somewhere to stay, just up from Mexico, where my affairs had all ended sad. And you could see that my ass was dragging, working underneath my old Volkswagen, out the back where they kept the garbage in the sun and everything smelled pretty bad. But in the middle of this journey, up popped a man named Ernie from an island that he'd left so long ago. He was a fisherman, he said, and back home he used a net, which he showed me it was the kind that you could throw. He described it to me there, a perfect circle in the air, just above the place they'd all come swimming by. And there was never any doubt that when Ernie pulled that circle out, there'd be lots of fish for everyone to fry. You throw a line in the water. You throw a line in the water. You throw a line in the water. Wait and see what you pull out. Well, I'm not one for taking chances, and I avoid most circumstances when I'm obliged to put my money on the board. But I sold that car to Ernie and left LA without returning and kept on moving, trusting no one but the Lord. And there's one thing I can tell you, nobody out there is gonna spell you. You're gonna have to mend those nets with your own hands. And you may fish, or you may whistle, or you may write an epistle. The seed is sown, but no one knows just where it lands. You throw a line in the water. You throw a line in the water. You throw a line in the